Our generational plight is overcoming inequality, systemic inequality, systemic exclusion, and the disparities between income and wealth. And I do think that we are rallying around those issues to address those problems. It may not be as obvious because we're not looking at a white opponent, but I do think there's a meeting of minds.
I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to this virtual reading group. My name is Emma Muteka, and I'm very honored to be the one to moderate the session. Very timely, yes, but very, very important as well. This group is by Daisry Mathias, who is the advisor to the President on Youth Matters and Enterprise Development in the Office of the President, with the objective to promote literary arts and continuous learning through a culture of reading. I'd like to really emphasize that the objective of this reading group is to promote the literary arts and the continuous learning through a culture of reading. Today, Daisry Mathias will be reading the pioneer book, The Offspring on the Namibian Liberation Struggle by Dr. Ndeulipula Hamutumwa. My apologies for that. Dr. Hamutumwa will be the one to provide a response to Daisy's review of the book. We are honored to have you, Dr. Ndeulipula. This session will strictly take 1 hour. So to make use of the little time that we have, I'd request that you please submit your questions or comments or contributions in the chat section. All right, without wasting any more time, let's dive into it. Daisry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Honorable Emma Muteka, for graciously accepting to moderate this session today. It's our commemorative session for August. We're reading in honor of Heroes Day. And I would like to say good morning to all our friends who are joining us once again from near and far, and for engaging with us in constructive dialogue and in the promotion of African literary arts. We're inspired by the proverb that until lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And this year we're reading, educating ourselves on, and we're celebrating modern African contexts, because as scholars, we want to know and we want to tell our own stories. We want to capture the zeitgeist, the spirit of the day, so that we're able to shape our own compelling narratives going forward. As a recap on last month we read Namibian journalist Gwen Lister's memoir, Comrade Editor. And this month we are remaining in the land of the brave. We're reading Pioneer, The Offspring of the Namibian Struggle by the affable Dr. and Comrade Ndeulipula Hamutumwa, who provides through this memoir an important generational perspective on the lived experiences of many young Namibians in exile. A little bit about the author before we get into the review. Our guest author, Dr. Ndeulipula Hamutumwa, was born on April the 4th, 1979 at Ongudi village in the Ohangwena region, a few months before his mother fled into exile into Angola, with him as an infant. Ndeulipula's life and educational journey was forged in Angola, in East Germany, in the former GDR, German Democratic Republic, and in post-independent Namibia. Ndeuli, as he is affectionately known, is a scholar, a businessman, a farmer, a politician, and a respected sports and community leader. He holds a Bachelor of Accounting degree from UNAM and 2 master's degrees in business leadership and organizational sports management. And in April this year, he successfully defended his thesis, graduating with a PhD in commerce with a focus on sports management. Dr. Hamutumwa is he's widely read, and he's also a writer. In this memoir, Pioneer, he published in 2019. It is his first book, but not the last book. He has indicated there are more to follow. Ndeulipula is a husband to 1, to Kadiva Diana Hamutumwa, and a father to 5. Notably, their marriage has been blessed with 2 sets of twins. Now, before I get into the review, I always provide a little bit of context of where we are on the continent, what's happening in the country around us during this time that this book is written. And this is the setting. South Africa was implementing apartheid policies in Namibia with equal force as in South Africa from the years 1915 to 1989. The agitation of southwest of SWAPO against the repressive regime started soon after the formation of SWAPO in April 1964, with one single-minded objective, and that was to ensure the liberation of Namibia and her people by any means necessary, through the words of Brother Malcolm X. SWAPO adopted a three-pronged approach towards liberation, which was namely 1, political mobilization, 2, diplomatic engagement, and 3, the armed struggle. By 1962, SWAPO cadres were being trained in several socialist countries who would later constitute the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, PLAN. SWAPO knew that it had to unite all Namibians and to cultivate a spirit of patriotism in order to counter and to divide and the divide and conquer policy of the South African regime, and so that we'll be able to fight a common enemy as a united front. Inside of the country, though, political mobilization and resistance was continuing to intensify. Meanwhile, on the international forum, mobilization, including petitioning, lobbying of the international community, continued aggressively. Although SWAPO's petitions were presented before the trusteeship committee at the United Nations General Assembly, they garnered a lot of awareness, they garnered a lot of support from the world, but they could not force South Africa to end its occupation of Namibia because resolution after resolution, they were being triple vetoed by the Western three in the Security Council. This was France, the United Kingdom, and the USA, who were in support of the apartheid regime in Namibia. In July 1966, the International Court of Justice threw out Namibia's case due to a technicality. And by not addressing the merits of the case, they failed to rule on the legality or the illegality of the apartheid South Africa's occupation of Namibia. This was a defining moment because it dashed the hopes of a peaceful resolution, a peaceful settlement, and it became a watershed moment for SWAPO, who had now determined that it was time to go to war. We had to fight. So on the 26th of August, 1966, we just commemorated this public holiday 2 days ago, the armed struggle was subsequently launched. And multitudes of Namibians, young and old, subsequently began to flee the country through Angola, Botswana, and Zambia to escape the repression and/or to join the armed struggle. This history is written, but the account that is narrated in the book Pioneer by Ndeulipula adds a unique dimension, which until this juncture has largely gone undocumented and untold. And it is the account of exiled Namibian children who were born into the armed struggle. So now I'm going to get into the book review. In his own words, because he's the protagonist, it's his memoir, Ialo Petrus Ndeulipula Uyuni Hamutumwa traces his family origins to the Ovambaja clan. He's originally from southern Angola, who had resettled maternally in the Omusati region and paternally in the Ohangwena region. He's born into a family of 4 children. Ndeulipula is the third-born son of his mother, Linekela Haihambo, who is a primary school teacher, and his father, Johannes Mani Hamutumwa, a renowned radio announcer and a respected entrepreneur and businessman in the local retail trade. So he has 4 older brothers, including an adopted elder brother and a younger sister. A successful businessman, his father was also an underground, an underground activist who was providing support against the armed struggle. And the father grew rapidly in rapport and in stature with the SWAPO leadership. And he also quickly attracted negative attention and attracted powerful enemies and had to face a lot of harassment, and eventually death threats attempts were made on his life by the South African security forces. So to save his life, his father had to flee into exile, and he went to the United Kingdom on a scholarship to go and study, leaving behind his pregnant wife and 3 young sons, toddlers, and his businesses to the care of his relatives. It was not long before the South African forces would begin to harass his wife, to divulge where his whereabouts were, and this forced her also to flee into exile. Heavily pregnant with 3 minor children in tow, they fled in the cover of the night towards Kwanza Sul, a civilian settlement that was set up by SWAPO in Angola. Ndeulipula recalls his childhood adventures vividly, and he invokes a lot of emotion with the experiences that he has experienced during his time in the refugee camp in Kwanza Sul. With the innocence of childhood, he explored the world with a lot of curiosity. He settled into a new community of strangers who soon became family. There was a striking personality whose character was really tested and refined by the struggle, and that is that of Ndeulipula's mother, Memeli Nekela. Memeline Keller epitomized the strength, the bravery, the resilience of an African woman. Separated from her husband by war, she was left to raise and to fend and to protect for 4 minor children in a refugee camp. She built them a 2-bedroom family home with bricks that she made out of her own hands. She taught them basic literacy. She was a teacher, so she taught them how to read and write. She taught them mathematics to instill competence, and she worked hard as a teacher at a distant primary school in order to meet their physical needs and in doing all that, she still remained a very present parent. She was available to discipline, to rear, to love, to nurse, to correct. And it really just goes to confirm that the burden of the forced separation of a once close-knit, stable family by the circumstances of war was more often than not disproportionately borne by the woman. During their formative years in the refugee camp in KwaZulu, the Hamutumwa family did not lack. Partly owing to the organized SWAPO leadership, who really rallied a lot of global solidarity and support for donations from friendly socialist and communist countries, but also because of the community of settlers who had embraced the principle of Ubuntu. The spirit that reigned in KwaZulu refugee camp at the time was one of unity of purpose and oneness in their mission. Everyone was united by the same struggle, and they were all unified around a shared vision. And that was the vision that an independent Namibia would emerge. Consequently, tribal and ethnic identity took second place. Ndeulipula remembers there was a peer of his who he later learned was from the Mafwe ethnic group in the Zambezi region. But this was unbeknown to him throughout their time together because the young man spoke Oshikwanyama fluently. And that was that. Everybody spoke Oshikwanyama and tribes were really irrelevant. Parents and elders assumed equal responsibility over all children in the camps. They supervised and they trained them up equally without fear or favor. And there was a benevolence, a generosity, a selflessness, a solidarity that was shared between these neighbors who were united in struggle. Despite the volatile nature of a refugee camp, Ndeulipula amassed fairly pleasant childhood memories. His mother was central, I believe, to their ability to adapt quickly in otherwise very challenging circumstances. Notably, the family unit was truly the worst affected and degenerated during the times of war. Their father was still separated, studying in the United Kingdom. Their mother, while he was gone, the mother also had to leave in order for her to pursue her studies abroad, joining her husband in the UK and leaving the 4 minor children in the total care of comrades who had become trusted family members. SWAPO had adopted the culture of everyone is your meme, everyone is your tate, everyone is your father and your mother. So after 1 year, their mother returned only to find that her eldest son, Olavi, Ndeulipula's brother, had been sent off to Cuba for school at the age of 9. Notably, the SWAPO government in waiting was quite organized, and while there appeared to be no real risks to the safety and the security of children abroad, you can imagine that there was a lot of emotional distress that proved challenging with the physical separation from primary caretakers and parents. During the time in the camp, Ndeulipula recalls that his pride, loyalty, and his willing indoctrination was to be a SWAPO pioneer. That was to be the next generation that was going to be prepared to be the future defenders of the Namibian revolution. You know, even at such a tender age, Ndeulipula's peers were desensitized at the sight of a lifeless human body. They were unflinching. They were trained not to be emotional about death, but to rather retain their focus on the struggle. So Ndeulipula is a patriot through and through. All he wanted to do when he grew up was to become a plan combatant, and oftentimes he felt that he was not growing fast enough so that he could get into the uniform. But disappointingly for him, at independence in 1990, Ndeulipula was only 11 years old, and he felt that his dream was cut short by 7 years, and he thought maybe independence could be deferred so that he could still fulfill his long-time vision of serving his country in his regard, the highest honor. In March 1989, at the age of 9 years old, Ndeulipula and his sister were made into the selection of the cohort that were going to go to Stassfurt in East Germany, in the former GDR, German Democratic Republic. There, they were going to continue their primary schooling. They were going to be introduced to both privilege, but more cultural shock through the exposure and the immersion. and a lot of emotional distress because regrettably his mother was not able to accompany them. She was not assigned. She was rather tasked by the party to remain behind in Luanda with their father. And while his older brother Natangwe was sent to Zambia for schooling. So he had to grow up very quickly, Ndeulipula, to take care of his younger sister and himself in a foreign land with a foreign language, surrounded by people that were unfamiliar, but who also very quickly became like family, kith and kin. Ndeulipula and the group of young Namibian children adapted quickly to that new environment, and they benefited a lot in the short term, in the short time that they were there in the GDR, from the cultural exchanges, the new foreign language, a more superior, a more holistic education system, which included sports and arts. They had access to better nutrition, improved facilities for a better quality of life. And they really created a lot of unforgettable childhood memories while witnessing things like the first snowfall in Germany, or for the first time they could watch the World Cup live on television. In fact, this group lived through history, and they were in Germany at the time that the Berlin Wall fell, reuniting East and West Germany. They also were able to follow the inauguration of Namibia's independence and the swearing in of our first president on 21 March 1990. Upon repatriation back to Namibia a few months after our country gained her independence, Ndeulipula and his cohort were in for a rude awakening. Remember that many of them had never seen Namibia. Many of them were born in exile. They didn't know what they were expecting, and they thought their experiences in Europe may, symbolize or represent what to expect from Namibia, certainly not the refugee camps that they had seen in Angola. For many of them, it was their first time in Namibia the day that they returned. And children that were orphaned in exile, the children that were orphaned in Kasinga, faced a very uncertain future, because when they arrived, they had to be taken into the custodianship of guardians, some of them who were not doing so well economically and really presented a setback in their standards of living. Many more were left unclaimed because nobody could just identify the children. So this created a lot of shock and trauma that continues to afflict this generation until today. Ndeulipula was fortunate though. He was reunited with his nucleus family. His mother and his father were still alive and they were able to collect him. And his parents were fortunate because they were still employed, so they could provide decent shelter and enroll them in decent schools. His parents were very intentional to facilitate their reintegration into the Namibian society because the children could not speak their vernacular languages properly anymore. So they sent them off to the north to spend time with their paternal grandparents and to rekindle those family bonds and to restore their mother tongue. Sadly, after just 2 years of being reunited as a family with, a mother and a father in one house, sadly, Ndeulipula's father developed a terminal illness and he passed away in 1993. During the time that Ndeulipula had access to his father, in the formative years, the few times in Angola, and now more permanently in the last 2 years post-independence, he imbibed a lot of virtues from the positive and the moral, principled and pioneering example that his father had set. His father was truly a pioneer in business, and he left a legacy that endures to this day. In sharp contrast to the socialist worldview that Ndeulipula was brought up in, and during in the political ideology and in the camps, for the very first time when he entered high school in Windhoek, he was exposed to and he was confronted to the economic segregation that was actually along racial lines. Fortunately for him, he had 4 life-changing and 4 destiny-shaping encounters. One with a Catholic spiritual leader who really spoke a word of promise over his life. One at a leadership camp that made him realize that he had leadership capabilities and made him to believe in his potential. Secondly, the role modeling of a successful, educated Black man who came to provide a motivational talk at his high school at the time. And finally, his debut into student politics and sports, which he used as tools for social integration, but also to discharge his leadership convictions. All of these experiences birthed his consciousness, and they dissolved and dwarfed any insecurities and inferiority complexes that he was struggling with, reaffirming to Ndeulipula that he was the leader and the politician that he had aspired to be. Ndeuli studied at the University of Namibia after completing grade 12 at St. Paul's College. And although he did not see that to be a blessing in disguise, it was at the time. He felt disadvantaged because he was not able to secure the funding that he required in order for him to pursue studies in South Africa, like the rest of his private school peers. But destiny had its own plan for him, because it was at UNAM that he was able to fully manifest his potentials and etch out an illustrious career in national sports leadership and management. It was at UNAM where he unlocked his growth and leadership influence and forged enduring networks and partnerships of friendship to this day. It was also at UNAM that Ndeuli met his wife Kadiva. In the final chapters of the book, Ndeulipula calls for an honest conversation about how well our founding leaders have done in the building of a Namibian house that espouses the virtues for which they fought for. He unpacks the political ideology, the values of communism, socialism, and capitalism, highlighting the conflicts that he faces, because he places a lot of emphasis on equality, sharing, placing the collective interest before individual gain and interest. He calls for Africa to see herself as one and to free herself from mental balkanization. Another point of reckoning for Ndeulipula was an immersion trip that he took to New York, which really baptized him in Pan-Africanism ideology, and he embraced the spirit of Pan-Africanism fully. He advocates for the leadership qualities of servant leadership, who is oriented to providing service to the people. He believes that leadership should be based on meritocracy. He believes that succession planning is a fundamental part of providing sustainable leadership. And true to the consistent socialist values, he believes in equitable redistribution models in order to achieve social justice in post-independence Namibia. For the future, Ndeulipula is contending that we need to infuse the Pan-Africanist ideals into education systems. We need to build the capacity of Africans so that Africans can add value to African natural resources. We must address land distribution equitably, and we must embrace faith and Christianity as African and as a tool for empowerment for the African people. There were a number of themes that were jumping out of the story, the life journey, and the different experiences that Ndeulipula narrated in this book. One was about economic empowerment. It was notable that even as far back as 1974, Ndeulipula's father was one of very few economically empowered Black Namibians who could own and manage their own productive economic assets. He owned wholesale stores that he had purchased from Portuguese who were migrating because of the political changing situation in Angola on the dawn of Angola's independence. There was also the theme of the emotional traumas that have had a long-term bearing on the psychosocial well-being of many children of the liberation struggle, a generation that I truly just feel has been misunderstood and who struggle to forge enduring connections because of the harsh circumstances that they grew in, where they just could not forge enduring relationships. Third, there's the theme of national integration and identity politics, looking at ethnic, racial, tribal, creed, and economic status, and the deeply sown divisions in our minds. Ndeulipula references what he finds to be problematic with the current segmentation of Katutura that still continues to perpetuate the Bantustans, where you still have Damara location and Bambu location and Herero location. All of these segmentations should be dismantled with the dismantling of the apartheid regime. It was one of our founding fathers on the continent who said, for the nation to rise, the tribe must fall. And our president speaks of a multi-layered, multicolored brick house, the Namibian house. And we believe that this is what is going to achieve unity in diversity. Another theme coming out strongly in Ndeulipula's book is that we are still a post-conflict society that is dealing with a lot of trauma and that requires healing and the reconciliation of tensions, even between implicit relations, like who made the greater contribution between exiles and exiles, those who are mobilizing politically inside of the country and those who made a sacrifice to go out of the country. Finally, is the definition and the role of the family, and particularly the role of mothers in the armed struggle for Namibia's political liberation. And also, Ndeulipula makes a point of the role of the church in nation building. I think these are the themes that we are going to unpack further on in our discussion. But as I come to a conclusion, Ndeulipula, I want to say thank you for writing this book. With it, you have achieved a number of important successes. Firstly, history must be written, and the perspectives and the lived realities of the children of the liberation struggle is a key contribution to the full, the detailed, and the accurate recording of our country's history. It's also an area that was largely undocumented, and I believe with your contribution and many others that will follow, building onto the body literature, we will have a 360 view of what has happened during that period of time and what it was like to really be there. Second, Ndeulipula, you build a bridge for education, for empathy, for tolerance. Through this work, you facilitate acceptance, understanding, and healing on a segment of our society who have, I believe, for the longest time, in my opinion, really been misunderstood. Ndeulipula, reading your life journey was very relatable to me because despite how different your childhood experience and circumstances were to mine, if I just look at the three of us who are facilitating this program, yourself, myself, and Emma, we are of the same generation, but we've lived through three very different yet inextricably linked realities of our country's history and our journey to nationhood. You were born in 79, you went into exile. I was born in 85, I didn't go anywhere. And Emma Muteka is a born free, born after independence. But we face the same future. We face a future that is, we have to define a shared future, and we are bound by a common destiny. But Emma, for example, she has a completely different dispensation. She was born free from oppression, free from racial segregation. She was born into national identity, born into sovereignty, born into the prospects of economic prosperity. So we live to face tomorrow together. And once again, we are duty bound, I believe. We have this generational obligation now to define our generational mission in a post-independent Namibia, to fulfill it or to risk betraying it. Consistent with your intellectual outlook, Ndeulipula, and true to your genuine desire to always want to know more and to do better, this piece of work was reflective in my view. It was educational, it was rich in historical facts, but it was also very entertaining with your self-deprecating sense of humor. You were very generous with your facts and details. I enjoyed reading your chapter on how you and Kadiva eventually became husband and wife. You were altogether willing to be quite vulnerable about your insecurities, about your fears, about your inferiority complexes, and you were bold about your dreams, your hopes, and your aspirations for a better Namibia. This is what makes us human. This is what makes us reliable, relatable, and this is what makes your story endearing. I believe you paid your mother a very worthy and a befitting tribute to Ndeulipula through this book. She was an outstanding figurehead in your growth, and she was central to your survival and eventually for you coming into your own man. To me, she is my hero in this story because, and I'm inspired by Ada, who put a post on social media that I agreed with wholeheartedly on the day of Heroes Day, because there have been so many unknown, unnamed, uncelebrated, unsung heroes, women like your mother, who sacrificed and raised intellectually capacitated, quality, productive citizens who have grown to become meaningful contributors to the advancement of our country's economy. And we need to, and we want to know their names. Finally, Ndeulipula, in your final thoughts on this book, you asked the question, and I'm going to ask you the question that you asked the reader. You asked us and you say, ask yourself whether the struggle for the independence of Namibia was in vain or whether we truly won it. You wonder whether we are truly free, because the Namibia that you experienced is so different from the Namibia that you envisioned as a pioneer, as a young pioneer. Ndeulipula, let me leave you with these two quotations. One is from the late President Nelson Mandela, and the second is from our own liberation stalwart, Andimba Toivoya Toivo. May their souls rest in peace. Nelson Mandela said, and I quote unquote, "I have walked the long road to freedom. I have tried to not falter. I have made missteps along the way. But I have the secret that after climbing a great hill, one finds that there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest and to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance that I have come. But I can rest only for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my walk is not yet ended. That's the quote from Nelson Mandela. And the quote from Andimba Toivo Toivo, he cautions us in his wisdom when he said the following: the second phase of the struggle, that for economic emancipation, would be greater and more challenging to attain than that for political freedom. This is because economic emancipation is individual. End of quote. I have found this statement to be very true over the years, and we should remind ourselves about its validity at every stage of our nation building project. Ndeulipula, thank you very much for reading the book. This is my impression, this is my review of your book, and I now yield the floor to you to hear your response.
Thank you very much, Daisry, and thank you very much, Emma, for your moderation. While I was listening to Daisry, I was going through memory lane, and I was really saying, is this really what I have written? But nevertheless, thank you very much for your review, and I hope I would not take a lot of time to do justice to what you have done. But let me begin by embracing one of the greatest scholars who I passionately believe in his thinking process. And I think he was also misunderstood because I think he was also a generation apart with many of his peers, and that is Thabo Mbeki, who say that whenever we find ourselves at festivals of ideas like this, or start from the beginning by saying that what you have just reviewed is accurate, and I believe that you have just done an excellent job. There's an adage there's an African adage that says that one who has no history of the past or has no knowledge of the past has no memory. And I thought it is important that when we find ourselves at this crossroad, it is important that we begin to ask a fundamental question. And that question is, how do we want the future to see us? And how do we want the future generation to up that way before us? It was those sentiments that motivated me to write this book. First, I felt that I can no longer be a bystander by denying the collective to appreciate our glorious history. And our history, as Daisry has narrated, was shaped through different strategy. And the role of the young children that were raised and born in exile is fundamental to the liberation struggle of our country. Because that chapter, if it's not well told, it leaves a lot of gaps in our analysis and articulation as far as the history of our country is concerned. So I felt that it's important that we document our history so that it benefits the future generation. Let the future generation of this country appreciate what others have done for us to enjoy where we are right now. And secondly, I thought it was also important to document our history because history has indicated that those that become civilized are those that appreciate their information, and the information becomes the center centerpiece of nation building. If you go through the line of civilization, if you go through the Western civilization, the Greek civilization, and the African civilization, you would recall that those that document their history are able to build on their civilization. And I thought, perhaps even in my smallness, it is important that we document our history so that others can build on and avoid conflicts, because conflicts in Africa sometimes are brought about because of diverse views and convergence of views because of lack of information. And so to narrate why I chose the title Pioneer, and or perhaps maybe talk about the title of the book, Pioneer, the Offspring of the Namibian Liberation Struggle. Whilst growing up in exile, we lived in a period of what Jimmy Carter, then the president, say it is an era of complication. And it was a time that the world was cut into two worlds, hence, the famous Cold War, and the liberation movement, then SWAPO, was forced to choose a side, or whether to follow the West or the East. And we were raised in an environment that communism was the essence of, and hence our ideological posture, our ideology was on that basis that everything for the struggle, everything for the total liberation of the country. So we were molded in a communist environment to believe that everything that we do was for the struggle, and that whatever we do, we must grow fast enough to defend the revolution, first in the war and also after the war. And that concept was well crafted through our education system, and it was through the pioneer system that we were told that these are the basic steps that you're going to follow so that you become a national defender of the liberation struggle. So the title Pioneer resonates well with me growing up, understanding that when I grow up, one day I should be able to defend the revolution. And that the offspring, all of us becomes offspring of the liberation struggle. Irrespective where you find yourself, whether you were born in Namibia or you were raised in exile, we remain offsprings of the liberation struggle. We are all pioneers, and that we need to begin to understand where we are coming from and when we are going forward. And secondly, maybe as part of the reflection, is the issue of understanding in the book. I thought it was important to give two worlds: a world where we were raised, and a world where we had to now look at the construction of the country post liberation struggle. And in the world of pre-liberation struggle, I think I wanted to narrate a picture where I was able to really profile the institution called SWAPO as a movement and the role that it has done to prepare future leaders. And the whole elements that for you to be able to develop within a society, it is important that SWAPO felt at that time that you need to inculcate a culture of patriotism, of loyalty, and sacrifice to be able to defend the revolution. And then also in the second part, in the post-liberation politics, I wanted to provide the elements of what should the Namibian youth personality look like. and what are some of the characteristics that we need to develop so that we can begin to honestly say we are going to develop the country through the economic revolution. I think those are really the contrasts that I wanted to paint, but also appreciate that as a pioneer that was raised in SWAPO, there were many, many challenges that we had to overcome. And there were also many, many opportunities that we have received. But how do we now narrow these opportunities that we have received during the liberation struggle to prepare us to talk about the reconstruction of a better Namibia for all? And I just really felt that it's important that we begin to put the basic steps that are very, very fundamental in winning a future for the young people moving forward. And I felt one of that is really begin to talk about the right leadership attributes that we need to have in the post-liberation politics. And secondly, also, I felt it was important to talk about the issue of equality and issue of opportunities for all. And I also felt that it's important to really understand the fundamental aspect of education through education that's Afrocentric and that embrace a collective that appreciate Africa as the birth of civilization, and also one that appreciate that Africa must be self-reliant, Africa must do for itself, and also believing that nobody would love you more than you loving yourself. But I also felt through the whole book, as part of moving forward, is asking a fundamental question of what is that session we must rally behind that can unite us individually, I mean, it's a collective. I've always believed that there are many things that we have spent so much time that we thought are the correct medium to unite us as a nation, but it has divided us for a very long period of time. And I believe through the book that what I have written, I'm vindicated. And that is the role of sport in nation building. And for the first time, I'm able now to sleep and say, God, you are a God of goodness and you are a God of greatness. That Boma and Masilingi had to come to win accolades and unite a society that sometimes they feel despair or disunited. For the first time, sport brought the nation together. And in the book, I was able to articulate that, to say that we need to find a common denominator that must unite us so that we can find the best out of everybody in the nation. Because if you look at around the world, nations are built when there is a collective unity and a collective vision where everybody moves in one direction. And for the first time, I'm able to sleep and say, I have not wasted my time and resources to promote the importance of sport, and that sport diplomacy shall continue to become the cornerstone of our global development. And I think that was also very important that I wanted to reflect was the issue of entrepreneurship. I wanted to highlight that since independence, one of the things that we have done very well was to invest in the first economy. So we were able to build sufficient infrastructure such as the roads, the building, the institutions, and also making sure that we continue to build on the first economy that we have founded. But I think what I wanted to point through entrepreneurship was that the second economy is very, very fundamental, and that the second economy remains the building block of the first economy. And it's important that we build entrepreneurship that are well educated, well resourced, given opportunity to build innovative idea, thresh out those ideas into concrete businesses, support those ideas, and create markets for those ideas so that we have ripple effect in terms of creating many young people that can build businesses. A good example I thought maybe I should share is that the woman that is making fat cook should be given an opportunity to eventually make bread. Those bread should be able to be absorbed into schools so that children are able to reap from a woman that used to make fat cooks into bread, and they are able to supply bread to school. And that is really what I thought is important to build the second economy. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight in the book, in my conclusion, Daisry, is the issue around methodological mentorship. The elements of identifying talent, nurturing the talent, and expose the talent to the highest level of leadership. There is no way you build a country where you are unable, where you do not identify talent, but you must invest in the talent so that that talent is able to be exposed to understand complex issue, understand our national agenda, understand our vision, and deploy that talent after a period of time into leadership. I thought it was important to really talk about the issue of mentorship because I am a benefit of a system like that, where I grew up in harsh condition, came back into Namibia, but I had an opportunity to work with the best mind in the country. At a very tender age, I was already roped into the sport system, where I was exposed to the highest level of leadership, given opportunity through the Namibian government to lead national sport team across the world at a very tender age. And it was only fair for me to narrate that into the book to say, we need to give opportunity by identifying, because leadership is not an accident. I leave you with a quote by Kwame Nkrumah, who said in 1948, while addressing a group of college students, that more than ever, Africa needs to have youth leaders that are of great discipline, leaders of high level of confidence, young leaders that are able to move Africa to the next level. And then he left the question to the young leaders to say, what should the African personality look like? I leave you with this question today. What should the youth leader's personality look like? So that when we walk into the corridor of life, we are able to identify young Namibian youth leaders that are disciplined, that are organized, that have Namibia as a basis of their collective agenda, and that they are willing to take Namibia to the next level.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamutumwa. I really, really appreciate that. I just want to take this opportunity to really remind the participants to please send their comments or contributions or questions under the chat function. I do see a couple of comments there. I'll attend to them in a while. I just have one question, Dr. Hamutumwa. This is actually directed to you. I am proudly one that comes from this generation that's called the Born Free. And today we are actually 31 years old. We're heading to the 40s. It's really unbelievable. But I really have a pressing question. We seem to be less united than the previous generation. How do you perhaps think we can define and unite around our generational cause? Or how do we get this right? What are we doing wrong?
What what are the youth doing that is wrong, or why are the youth not united as a collective? I think in any society, it is important that we should always understand that when we have this question called the Namibian project, Namibian development project, we must, everybody have a role to play. Just like, for example, when you are when you're in a football team, there are 11 players, and every player that are in the team have a role, well-defined roles. And the reason why you have a system like that is to avoid conflict within a team. So it is important that the youth are honestly look themselves into the mirror to identify their God-given talent and the role that they can play. Appreciate even the smallest role that you can play in the team, because not everybody, when you're a leader, would be in front, but those that are even motivating, those that are writing, those that are finding strategy, everybody plays a role. I think the lack of unity is really fostered because of lack of ideology. Ideology is a big problem, because you cannot be in a team without understanding the ideological posture or the ideological standing of what the nation or what the society wants to do. And that is why you see some are saying that let us move to the left while you want to move to the right. But if you are a lack of ideology, it breeds conflict and bring disunity. A good example is, maybe if we borrow example from countries such as Cuba, where the whole concept of patriotism is fostered in the school system and in society. And the ideological posture in Cuba is molded by understanding that Cuba first. For us is, what is that unite us to make Namibia first, where everybody have a role to play? I think the ideology is something that we need to begin to understand, and everybody must play a role in that ideology.
If I can add a little bit to that discussion on ideology, there's a quote that I read that I found interesting, from President Vladimir Putin of Russia on the issue of democracy. And he said, "But I'm convinced that democracy cannot be exported from one country to another. Like you cannot export revolutions, you cannot export ideology. Democracy is an internal subject of the developing society. Therefore, they are fundamentals of democracy, and they should be understood universally in different countries." And I'm bringing that because as I was reading your book, Ndeulipula, what was glaringly obvious to me was that during the struggle for political liberation, because we're still in a struggle, a different form, but during your phase of the struggle, when you were in exile, there was a lot of altruism and there was a lot of indifference on the things that separated us, on the things that divided us. We looked beyond race, we looked beyond creed, we looked beyond ethnicity, we looked beyond tribe, because we were so committed to a certain outcome. But that is also because of the socialist orientation and the worldview, that the ideological beliefs of that time. But now I think we've embraced a more capitalist regime, a capitalist order, and capitalism is about individual gain and individual interest and advancing the individual. And I think those are the things that begin to dismantle some of the foundation, the fundamental successes that we had in place. So they are the things that can divide us. Of course, now we're fighting against the legacy of apartheid in the form of structural poverty, entrenched inequality, economic exclusion. But the enemy is even more invisible now. Before it was a white oppressor, now you can't see misogyny, you can't see violence, you can't see bigotry, you cannot touch inequality. So it's a bit more difficult for us to identify a definite target. But I think what should unite us, to try and respond to the comment of the moderator, we should be united, that we remain unfulfilled. We have achieved one of two important successes. And as long as we have not been able to achieve equity, shared prosperity, inclusive growth, we remain shackled by the shackles of poverty and bondage. And that should be enough of a clarion call to unite our generation across the differences. I drew the dichotomy across those in exiles, those in exile, those who are born free. Ideologically, we should be able to unite around the concept of a united and inclusive and a shared Namibian house. And I think this is the language that our leadership is putting across, of one Namibia, one nation, of a house that is free from different tribes and ethnicities, that is united in diversity. If we can believe it and embrace it and act on it, I think that we don't have too much of a fight. The struggle would be our own separations in our mindsets.
Yeah, moderator, maybe if I can also just add to what Daisry was talking about, which I fully agree. I think the fundamental question in addressing this issue of unity is really, for example, understanding what is, for example, the socialism with Namibian characteristic, and what is a Namibian house. I think in the more what divides the youth, it's our inability to find conversion of concepts and ideas where we can coexist and be in a collective in an environment where we are one. For example, if we are in a Namibian house, we should develop attributes of love and sharing. Unity becomes meaningless if it's not accompanied by shared prosperity, as Daisry is talking about. I will not be loyal to a system. I will not be loyal or patriotic to a system if I'm hungry. So I think the challenge we have as the youth is, how do we build a society that is caring, a society that believes in sharing, a society that believes in creating opportunity for all, a society that believes that Namibia can only become colorful if everybody has the basic needs as articulated by Maslow hierarchy of needs, to be secure, to have food on the table, and also to be able to have the answers of hope. And one of the things that we also need to do is, we should not wait for our elders to provide solution to us. They have done their part, and they have made sure that they have achieved the political independence. I think what we need to do is now to find solution for ourselves. And those solutions can only happen if we work together. But the biggest challenge we have that we need to overcome is that if you are in the position of leadership and you were placed there by the masses, you must never forget where you are coming from. For too long, sometimes you find the person was among the collective youth. When they become leaders, then they forget that they used to wear overalls, and that they no longer believes in what brought them there. So I think Emma, the question of unity is a very complex issue, but I think it can be addressed by really sharing those fundamental basic needs that Maslow have talked about.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamutumwa. And I must say that that very last part stands as a now reminder to those of us who are currently in leadership. You know, as you were speaking, I kept asking myself, this is unbelievable. I didn't ever in my entire life think I would find myself in this very seat listening to such comments and having to be reminded where one needs to be so that we can push this, or rather sail this ship into the right direction. So thank you very much. I'd like to read some of the comments. Oliver Mohiro, he says that Dr. Ndeulipula Hamutumwa has a very rich Pan-African background that really needs to be highlighted and reflected upon, especially right now at a time when us as African youth are deeply divided by artificial colonial borders. The next one would be from Oscar. Oscar says that he is from Angola, listening about Kwanzaa Su, and his question is, what are some of your fondest memories in Angola, and how did those memories contribute to the sterling character and personality that you are today, as well as what can the youth learn from it? Perhaps the third one would be from Mao. I fully agree to the concept of fostering unity amongst ourselves as an intergenerational link. However, my question still remains as to what practical and tangible methodology should we employ to fulfill that?
Let me maybe just dive into the question, the memory in Angola, and I don't want to labor on this one for too long. I think the first one was one of my greatest memory in Angola was even as children, we were mobilized to believe that the greater cause that you can put your heads to achieve a total liberation of any cause is unity, and that without unity, without patriotism, without sacrifice, and without solidarity, there will be no achievement on any struggle. Therefore, the lesson is that if there is no unity, patriotism, solidarity, we will not win the economic revolution. And secondly, one of my greatest memory was that Angola is a fertile country, and we were able to eat fruits around. Agriculture was very flourishing. And it only made me to understand that food security is the fundamental building block of any civilization. So for the challenge we have now as young people is, how do we make agriculture the cornerstone of our economic development? There is no civilization, there is no economic development without food security. How will you think for any development strategy if your stomach is empty? And the last one was really the issue of leadership. In Angola, there was, if a leader speak, we all salute the leader because we believe that that leader has our interest at heart. And I believe that if we draw parallel to our situation, we must begin to appreciate the leaders that we have, support them, so that we empower them to make decisions for our collective. And I think that is very, very fundamental. So my memory in Angola was a memory of challenges. Matter of fact, I think Daisry was supposed to say that because of lack of hygiene, most of us, our feet were dysfunctional, or they were our Daisry, what is the word? Our feet.
You had maggots or worms that penetrated from the sand into the skin, and they formed all kinds of deformities to the toenails.
Yeah. So as if I take off my shoes and you look at my feet, they are disintegrated. I don't know what's the word. Disinfected, to an extent that I came to understand when we went to Germany that the health system is very, very important. And that is why it is important in our nation that we must prioritize on the health of our people, because health is intricate to development. If the society is not healthy, if the society there is no level of hygiene, and when we are talking about hygiene here, I want to say the hygiene of the mind, hygiene of the spirit, hygiene of the soul. that society will not flourish. We went through this, but it was a hygiene of our body, but we only came to realize that all the aspects of hygiene in a human development are very, very important.
Thank you. I want to try and come in with two reflections. I'm attempting a response at Ada and Mao, who put into the group to say that we're not agreed on what we are to unite around. What is the value, the principle, and the golden rule that unites us? And secondly, what kind of methodology should we employ to fulfill our generational unity? And I don't think there's a silver bullet, because if we had the silver bullet, we would have surpassed of some of these conversations. But what I can say is this: an honest reflection is that democracy has its flaws and limitations. Where you find the greatest amount of convergence is in systems or setups that are more uniform. If we take the example of the Asian tigers, for example, you take Singapore, you even take systems like in China, there's a lot of convergence, there's a lot of uniformity, and uniformity helps with unifying societies, unifying ideas and ideologies. So in our democracy, we encourage divergence before we can reach a convergence. And that is what actually makes exercise perhaps more complex of uniting around ideas and principles. What I do want to say are the principles that are already uniting us generationally, are the principles of sharing, the principles of redistribution. We are, I think, generally agreed and unified around the principle of inclusivity, the principle of equality, and the principle of equity. We see this in the way that we're deploying economic policy, advocacy on land redistribution, on natural resources redistribution. This talks to our agency. I think our generational plight, the thing that characterizes us, our challenge for our forefathers, it was political oppression. Our generational plight is overcoming inequality, systemic inequality, systemic exclusion, and the disparities between income and wealth. And I do think that we are rallying around those issues to address those problems. It may not be as obvious because we're not looking at a white opponent, but I do think there's a meeting of minds that is our generational agency. Finally, in terms of what kind of methodologies can we deploy to fulfill this generational unity, I think it's in the practical things. I think it's about leveraging the public good, unlocking the power of sports, which, transcends all boundaries and races and creeds, music, cultural, the creative industries. It's about fostering patriotism. It's about fostering a culture of volunteerism. And these are things that we can do with our young people through our education curriculum. Of course, we wouldn't be able to do a National Youth Service Corps for a whole year because we have a youth bulge. The cost would just not be sustainable. But I do think if we are intentional to inculcate, like we saw in the refugee camps, that indoctrination of patriotism, volunteerism, service, and being a loyal subject of your country. Those are the things that set the pioneers apart from our generation subsequently. And I think those are the methodologies we should be intentional to deploy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Hamutumwa, as well as Daisry. This brings us to yet a unfortunate end to this very, very fruitful session. And I must say, I think everybody does or will agree with me that it was really, really rewarding. So I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Daisry for your review and insight. Thank you, Dr. Hamutumwa, for your reaction, reflection, and response to the review. Let me also take time to say thank you to the participants for making time to participate in this session. The next session will be held on the 25th of September, the same time, same place. And the title will be announced in due course. So this brings us to the end of our session. I'd like to urge us to all please continue to stay safe. Let's take care of ourselves. Let's wear our masks, sanitize, most importantly, keep our distance Let's practice social distancing, and may God bless us all. Thank you.